Hello and welcome to Wednesday Debate Live with Taghreed Hussein here on Nile TV International. Tonight we'll be talking about a story that made headlines while Egypt participated in the COP26 with the attendance and participation of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and sharing in the meetings and also meeting eye to eye with world leaders on the sidelines of this important summit. Not only did Egypt manage to rise to domestic and regional challenges, but this great nation also takes part in solving global ones, thanks to the new republic along with its political leadership, who is doing his best and is sparing no effort today to prove to the world that Egypt is really the mother of the world. The new republic strategy is unprecedented in its scope and significance, as Egypt has adopted an approach towards achieving sustainable development that is characterized by a high level of ambition, firm commitment, and dynamic innovation. The comprehensive strategy spans over the three dimensions of sustainable development, namely economic, social, as well as environmental dimensions. We'll be talking about COP26 and the UN Change Conference that is held in Glasgow, where the President met with world leaders, highlighting issues of concern to developing countries in general and to African states in particular. And reading this important topic and this headline, we're really honored to have with us Professor Dr. Mohamed Fahmy, Professor of Political Science at AUC. Dr. Fahmy, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Pleasure is mine. And together we'll be reading this headline right after taking a look at this report highlighting the President's speech at COP26. Let's watch.
In his speech at the UN Climate Change Conference COP26 in Glasgow, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi called for an urgent climate action to achieve the goal of limiting global warming, voicing Egypt's keenness to host the next UN Climate Change Conference, the COP27, in 2022. In his speech, the President stressed that Egypt has initiated serious steps to apply a sustainable development model that aims for government-funded green projects to reach 50% by 2025 and 100% by 2030. The head of state underscored that Egypt is also working towards the transition to clean transportation, preparing the necessary infrastructure for that, and establishing smart and sustainable cities. This, in addition to the implementation of projects to rationalize water consumption, canal linings, and the integrated management of coastal areas. The President also stated that Egypt has completed the preparation of a national strategy for climate change 2050, which will open the way for Egypt to update its nationally determined contributions so that the policies, objectives, and measures encompassed in these contributions become integral to the state's developmental efforts. President al-Sisi emphasized that developing countries' implementation of their commitments to address climate change is conditioned by the amount of support they receive. That is considered a keystone of African countries' abilities to raise their climate ambitions within the balanced framework that the Paris Agreement represents. In this regard, President al-Sisi called on developed countries to fulfill their pledge to provide $100 billion annually to developing countries to address the effects of climate change. Finally, the President stressed that although Africa is not responsible for the climate change crisis, it faces the most negative repercussions. In this respect, he added that Egypt calls for the need to provide the African continent with special treatment, especially within the framework of implementing the Paris Agreement, given its special conditions and the challenges it faces.
Professor, it comes timely as Egypt is joining hands today with the world in order to discuss issues related to combating climate change. And Egypt's participation in such a renowned conference or summit definitely also reflects our heavyweight in the region.
Of course. I mean, we have to remember that today when the President was speaking, Egypt's participation was also represented as the African voice. And this is not the first time that Egypt participates in a climate summit with the understanding of it being not only an Arab country, not only an important regional partner, but also a representative to a great extent of the African continent and of the issues and the challenges that the continent is facing. with regard to climate change. So yes, of course, the participation of Egypt is important on many levels, and also important because Egypt, as we know, will host the coming COP27 next year. So the participation and the important role of Egypt is highlighted on many levels, as we can say that, yeah.
Yes, the news circulated when it was announced that Egypt would be hosting COP27. Definitely, it signals many messages to the world. What sort of messages, in your opinion?
I think the most important message that, in addition to the political and the geopolitical importance of the country that we have witnessed for a very long time now, is that when it comes to regional diplomacy on such an important issue, again, like global warming and climate change, the country that hosts this event will be expected not only to be an important player, but also a country that is committed to the objectives of cutting down on carbon emissions and reducing the environmental impact. So it's a multifold sort of message that Egypt is a relevant country in that file, and that it also plays a major role in the diplomacy and the negotiations regarding that issue.
Yes, talking about this sense of multi-dimensional messages and tasks, we are also definitely working on the developmental goals, and this is matching sustainability and working to achieve also sustainable developmental goals. And the president definitely had presented Egypt's vision and Africa's vision before such an important forum. If we talk about the main highlights of the president's speech and messages that were delivered to the world on that respect, and as we can see here with the UK's Boris Johnson and meeting with different and many leaders all around the world. So definitely it's also a chance for seeing eye to eye vis-a-vis regional and international matters with world leaders.
Yes, I mean, usually what happens in these events, of course, is that the president of the current summit is in a way also delegating or transforming the leadership to the incoming president of the next summit. So this level of partnership was quite, I think, obvious. So there were not only one, I think there were several meetings between the two heads of states. And when it comes to the messaging that was highlighted in Egypt's speech, I mean, first of all, the main message was that Egypt is a country that also suffers from environmental hazards. As we know, in addition, of course, to the Delta region, which is threatened by the high levels of water. We also have issues of desertification, deforestation. We have a lot of challenges that we need to meet. So Egypt is a country that knows about the environmental problems, and that's also committed to environmental development and enhancement. And as we can see in different projects like renewable energy that was mentioned clearly, like projects with regard to irrigation, cultivation, agriculture, a lot of files that really Egypt is working on to attain a lesser environmental impact and to meet the global target of zero carbon emissions by 2050. So that was highlighted, I think, on in many ways in this speech.
Yes, such important forums are also an opportunity to provide the whole world with a sense of messages about how Egypt is progressing and the different developmental projects taking place in the country. If we're talking also about smart cities and environmentally friendly cities, all those achievements are definitely in place before the whole world. So it's a great forum to brand Egypt globally and talk about also those achievements. Talking about the term environmentally friendly that we are seeing a lot in our lives, and how to make it quite applicable, in your opinion, in the future of Egypt or in the new republic. How do you see it?
Well, I think we see that already in front of our eyes with the new administrative capital. A lot of the energy grid, I think, of that city will depend on renewable sources and permanent sources of energy. The country is already committed to reducing its carbon emissions and to meeting this global objective again of reducing the temperature rise in the different countries of the world by 1.5 degrees. A lot of other emerging and developing countries are not able to commit themselves to that target. But at the same time, also Egypt is highlighting that there needs to be environmental and global collaboration, that this is not a target that can be met by only one country. There needs to be collaboration from, and also commitment for the developed world to meet its responsibility of also working on technology transfer, on supporting these developing countries with funds and know-how so that they can meet their targets. So
Yeah.
again, it's a two-way process that we're looking at here.
Yes, talking about the developed world and the industrialized countries and their sense of commitment, and the president also talked about that in his speech on developed countries fulfilling their pledge to provide $100 billion to the developing nations to face, for instance, global warming. So the fact that Egypt was representing the voice of the African continent, as you said it wisely, Professor, at the beginning of the show.
Yes. Well, because today we have countries like the UK, for instance. They're speaking very nicely about the importance of cutting down carbon emissions, reducing temperature increase, but at the same time, these developed countries, Britain, the US, Western Europe, have benefited in many ways in their progress and economic growth from the impact that they have left on the environment for a very long time.
Yeah.
So it's about time that they also took the responsibility and also bore the brunt of this heavy toll that was caused for the entire global environment. The developing countries are not saying that we will not work on this target. No, we are committed to meeting these targets. But at the same time, we also expect support from the developed world, that it's not enough for the whole world to say now today, right, we're committed to that. But what about the role that has to be played also by the developed, the richer countries that have reached this level of richness thanks to the impact they have left on the environment for a very long time. So again, this, I think, equation has to be dealt with very delicately here, because we have also other important issues. We're not saying that the environment is not important, it's not a luxury, as we can see today throughout the world, Europe, Asia, Africa, throughout the world. It's a very timely issue that we need to meet. But at the same time, there are also issues of income gaps, poverty, social and economic challenges that need to be met with these countries. So it's unfair at this stage to expect them to pay an equal price to the countries that have already benefited from the developmental process that was caused by environmental degradation. So yes, commitment from these countries, but also a role to be played by the developed world.
Yes, Egypt has completed the national strategy for climate change, that is 2050, and this allows the country to mainly update its nationally determined contributions. So talking about our endeavors in that respect, especially amidst the repercussions of COVID, how do you see it?
It's a big challenge, definitely. Again, when a country is committed to reducing environmental impact while facing also a health problem like COVID, it requires a multifaceted level of efforts from all government agencies, coordination on the strategic level, medium and long-term level, and also meeting the current timely short-term challenge. So I think we can see that actually today, especially over maybe the past couple of months, I think all of us can feel that there is a greater effort put into something like the vaccination, increasing vaccination rates of COVID, returning travel now to the country, and something like the summit that will happen next year. I think it's a very remarkable point that highlights that the safety and the ability of the different countries of the world. This is in many ways the biggest global event. Today in Glasgow there's more than 25,000 participants from different countries, and it's not only for the 2 days in which the presidents or the heads of state will be there. There are 2 more weeks in which the delegations from these different countries will meet and start negotiating the nitty-gritty details of the agreement, if there's to be any hope. We hope, of course, that there will be an agreement, but it's a long period of stay and of welcoming and meeting these different delegations. So again, it's a challenge that I think Egypt is standing up to very well.
Yes, Egypt is standing up to this challenge very well, and such important events like hosting COP27. And days ago, there has been also in Luxor the World Cities Day. More events like these are definitely branding Egypt globally. And together they are one of the arms. We have a diversified foreign policy that engages in a sense of partnership and exposure with different countries all over the world. And at the same time we have other arms, which is Egypt's soft power and the industry of conferences and festivals and so on. How would that help? How are they supporting one another?
It's very important. I mean, we cannot stress more the importance of a country like Egypt being present in such events. Again, this event is covered today by the entire world. All the global news agencies, the people themselves of the world are awaiting this event to see what will happen next. So you will have the eyes of the world centered on Egypt for a long period of time. So it sends definitely the right message, but also the juxtaposition of Egypt's role in the process is very important because, again, of the messaging, because of the stances that the country is taking. I mean, today we have countries from the developing world, for instance, like Russia and China, that have been criticized because they did not participate with their heads of state. President Xi Jinping from China was not present, the Russian president was not there. And, you know, there were voices saying, if your country is interested in such files, then the president will need to be there. So for Egypt to be present while also voicing out the message, saying that, yes, we care about the environment, it's a very crucial file for our livelihood and well-being, but we also expect the developed world to pay its dues. This sort of multifaceted messaging, I think, is very important. And again, I think this is a model that other countries can look at and maybe try and follow.
Yes, definitely. Egypt is presenting a model to the whole world, and I guess that our chairmanship of the African Union had really yielded fruit throughout. And Egypt is talking today as a voice of Africa at large, and we're building on the foundation that has been established, reaping the fruit of this rich year of the Egyptian presidency. How do you see this, this sense of collaboration and partnership that has been achieved and the solid foundation actually throughout the past 7 years with the African countries?
I think Egypt has a very strong legacy in the African continent. Whenever you speak to you know, people from Africa, whether from North Africa, the South, East, all the different regions, they really treasure the importance of Egypt. And for a very long time, they had been saying, well, where is Egypt? We need Egypt to be present. I mean, you're blaming us for other regional players that are increasing their role in Africa, like Turkey, like Israel, like other countries. Where is Egypt? So I think for the past few years, Egypt has been gradually regaining its position in the African continent as a major player. And this is really shown in the different projects that are now sponsored by Egypt. So it's not only lip service to being friendly with the African continent. It's also about working with African partners on developmental projects, benefiting from Egypt's experience in fields like infrastructure, like roads, electricity. We see this increasing sort of also economic and
the health issues
business
also.
ties and health and the environment today. So
Yes.
these issues, working together on real issues, not only you know, talking without doing much work. I think this is also very important. All these solidifies Egypt's relation with the African continent.
Yes, solidifying Egypt's relations with the African countries and also a sense of partnership with the outside world. We have more meetings on the international level with the president, and as we said before, that usually such huge events are always an opportunity to see eye to eye on regional and international files. So our dynamic foreign policy and foreign minister and foreign presence in such gatherings.
Yeah, very important, I think, very important. And it's highlighted by, not only by the COP, but most, I would say, of the files that are relevant in the region today, political, economic, something like the conflict, for instance, in Libya. Egypt is playing a major role there, considered to be one of the major regional players in drawing or redrawing the map of the political process in Libya in the coming period. The Arab-Israeli conflict, again, Egypt's regaining or repositioning itself as the main regional player when it comes to the conflict and reaching a resolution. Iraq increasing again and again. I think the new thing or the different thing that we're seeing today is not only a political role or a dependency on the legacy of the country, but also coupling this with economic and social roles that are being played again by corporations, by economic collaboration, business ties, very important and only re-emphasizes that this presence of Egypt is not only because of its history, which is very important, and soft power, very important and very relevant, but it has to be also coupled with real benefits.
On the ground.
On the ground, exactly.
Yes. Well, there has been many links actually. This week it was COP26 and it was the Cairo Water Week last week, 2021. So this definitely reflects Egypt's interest in water issues, in climate issues. So both came like on heels. The messages on behalf of such huge events to the world, in your opinion, Doctor?
Yeah. Well, Egypt, unfortunately, is considered, or has been considered for a while, as poor in terms of water resources. The presidency announced that a few weeks ago, but again, that wasn't a surprise. We know that not even because of the conflict with Jerd Dam. This is another thing, definitely related, but Egypt has to work on renewable sources of water desalination, on building new ways. I think Egypt is currently, and the government recently also announced a major project for recycling, water reuse from irrigation, that the water will be reused again in new agricultural projects. So there's really a lot of work to be done in that regard, and Egypt is working its way, but it's a long way to go. And I think the commitment from the state and the government is very important, because when it comes to water, especially also with the conflict with Ethiopia over the Jerd Dam, and so far the slowness in reaching a binding agreement.
Binding agreement, yes.
Egypt will have to work on alternative sources of water for its future and for its sustainability.
Yeah. Such events are also very important to draw attention to the Gerd issue. And Egypt's message has always been crystal clear in that respect, a legally binding agreement.
Yes. Well, I mean, we have to also understand that events like this, COP26 and COP27, only strengthens Egypt's ties also with the rest of the world. So when you come and tell countries, well, we're committed to the environment, we're hosting the biggest global event with regard to the environment, but we also have an environmental problem regarding the Nile with, another country not very far from our borders, not committed to international law,
legality,
and we are calling for them to be committed to an internationally binding agreement. So it definitely strengthens the message and Egypt's position in this particular conflict.
Yes, definitely it is. As we've said, that such important events are always an opportunity for world leaders to see eye to eye on regional and international files. The President, Prime Minister Johnson, agreed on strengthening UK engagement in Egypt's developmental plans. The highlights in this report.
President Fattah al-Sisi and British Prime Minister Boris Johnson agreed in a meeting on the sidelines of the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, the COP26, to strengthen the UK's engagement in implementing Egypt's priority development plans. During the meeting, Prime Minister Johnson described Cairo as one of the main partners of the UK in the Middle East, affirming British support to the ambitious development projects carried out in Egypt. President al-Sisi and Johnson agreed on strengthening bilateral cooperation in various fields, especially the areas of investments, security, intelligence, military, as well as education, tourism and health. El-Sisi and Johnson also agreed on opening new cooperation horizons between the two countries. Both leaders also discussed the latest developments in the efforts to confront climate change. Worth mentioning that Egypt has been seeking continuous cooperation with the UK, especially in supporting efforts for the adaptation to the effects of climate change through the Egyptian-British Alliance for Adaptation and Facing the Effects of Climate Change. Egypt also partnered with the UK on the issue of developing sources of adaptation and resilience within the Climate Change Summit in New York in 2019. During the meeting, President al-Sisi affirmed to Johnson Egypt's aspiration to host the 27th edition of the UN Climate Change Conference, the COP27 in November 2022, in the Red Sea resort city of Sharm el-Sheikh.
You're talking about the UK's engagement in the developmental plans of Egypt, and if we talk about the last 7 years, the Egyptian-UK relations have seen great leaps.
Yes. I think in the beginning, maybe after 2013, there was a period of uncertainty regarding the relations between the two countries. But I think as the time passed and as the government of Boris Johnson was established as a long-standing one, as we know, of course, in the UK government sometimes come and go very quickly. So with this sort of establishment, I think the major files, there was more clarity on the relations between the two countries and the ways to move forward. And there's a lot there between these two countries that they can work on. The UK has a very long history of solid ties with Egypt. It goes back to the 18th and 1700 century, So it's a very long relationship, and I think over the past few years, especially maybe I would say 4 or 5 years, this relationship has been improving on many levels, yeah.
Yes, it is. And definitely both leaders agreed on strengthening the sense of bilateral cooperation between both countries. Johnson described Cairo as one of the main partners of the UK in the Middle East. How are we working on further fostering this sense of partnership?
Well, the UK and Egypt, first of all, on the major files, I think they see eye to eye or very closely linked visions when it comes to most of the major files that we talked about earlier, again, like Libya, Iraq, Arab-Israeli conflict. And when it comes to the Ethiopian dam, I think, again, it's important for the UK, again, to show this strong set of ties with the country by supporting Egypt's stance on a higher level, just like the rest of the Western countries. And I think there is room there to be exploited in that regard. I think increasingly the statements coming from the UK are moving a bit closer to the Egyptian stance, especially with the ongoing conflict also in Ethiopia with regard to the Tigray conflict in that region. So again, by applying more pressure on Ethiopia, it will only side more with Egypt. And the UK, of course, very important, one of the P5 in the Security Council, and has its huge ability to leverage over most of the countries of the world. So again, very important for these ties to be strengthened and highlighted in the coming period.
Yes, definitely. Professor, if we talk about our foreign policy, considered to be one of the fundamental components of success, and we're always talking about our foreign policy as a main component for success, as I said, and also drawing features for branding Egypt globally and the Egyptian identity and character in the new republic.
Yes. Well, diversifying foreign relations. I think
priorities of our foreign policy, if we can say.
We need to understand that Egypt today has had to diversify its set of relations, being perceived only as a crony state of the West or a client state of the Western camp, which was the case before, cannot really bear fruit anymore. So Egypt had to re-strengthen its ties, as we mentioned, with the African continent, also with the Eastern Bloc, Russia, China, Asian countries, Latin America. So this sense of diversification on many files in terms of military relations, in terms of political ties, economic projects also. It's very important for a country like Egypt to re-establish itself as a global player that has strong ties with the entire world. Not only with one camp over the other. And this, when it comes to files like today the environment, for instance, it also helps Egypt in formulating policies and visions that are closer to the global perspective. So we don't take, for instance, clear-cut stances like maybe a country like India today has announced that it won't be able to meet the 2050 global targets of cutting down its carbon emissions, not until 2070. This is, of course, maybe understandable from the Indian position, but it will also lead to repercussions when it comes to its relations with the rest of the world. On the other hand, we see Egypt has taken much more agreeable stance of saying, well, we can work on meeting these targets, but only by building more ties and by having the West, countries like the UK, others, meeting their obligations as well.
Yes. Taking into consideration the fact that Egypt took, or the issue of combating terrorism and extremist ideologies as a high priority, in our foreign policy? How did this message reach the world? In many speeches also it was quite evident.
Yeah. And again, not only by speeches, but also by actions.
By action, definitely.
And policies. You know, over the past 2 or 3 years, the amount of what we used to call here the boats of death that used to venture into the Mediterranean, stemming from Egypt, has dwindled, almost disappeared.
Illegal immigration.
Illegal immigration. So Egypt plays a major role in that process as a gateway for stopping this process.
And we have a partnership with Cyprus and Greece also
Cyprus,
in that
Greece,
respect.
Italy also.
And Italy, yeah.
So it's you know, this Mediterranean also role for the country is very important, and it goes to show that Egypt is committed to its words, not only again by paying lip service, but by actually meeting its challenges and by succeeding so far. I think again it's a major success story. That for a while this was perceived almost like a mission impossible, that a country like Egypt with its huge naval area will be very hard to meet this objective of ending the migration stemming from its borders, from its shores. But we managed to do that to a great extent. So again, that's a success story, and it's again perceived positively by the countries of Western Europe, that this is, you know, a government that can deliver on its promises.
Delivering on its promises, and delivering on its promises also brings us to the characteristics and the features of the new republic, and the president delivering on his promises to make Dunya Ad Dunya, the mother of the world, Ad Dunya, definitely a great country that we all deserve and aspire to improve the quality of life for all Egyptians, and also investing in the people, in the human capital. So talking about branding Egypt globally, and how can our foreign policy today contribute in that respect through action, as you have mentioned, Professor?
Well, it's not enough to build an image, again, without the actions that support this kind of image.
Yeah.
So you know, Egypt is a major country of huge history, but also of a very big population. And the amount of human resources that the country possesses is really massive. So Egypt has also its vision of 2030, which focuses on the developmental aspect of enhancing the educational sector, the health sector in the country. And these are, I would say, the sectors that will shape the future of Egypt. So by committing, again, to a vision as such, by these strategic objectives, we can only look forward to a bigger role to be played in terms of technology transfer, foreign investments, economic growth, you know, development on many, many levels.
Yeah. If we would say, what sort of fruits do you see the outcome of COP26? What would you say?
Well, I would borrow the words of, the British Prime Minister, who said that he is cautiously optimistic. So, you know, this is not the first time that such a global summit was held. You know, we've had previous promises and agreements reached in Rio, in Kyoto, and most recently in Paris. And unfortunately, these promises have not been met up to date. The temperature of the world still it keeps on increasing. Today it's 1.1 Celsius. The target today for the world is to keep this temperature rise by the 1.5 degree, because if it increases than 1.5, then the livelihood in something like between 20 and 30% of the world will be impossible. And we can only imagine if the temperature keeps on increasing more than that, what will happen. And then you have the global target of zero carbon emissions by 2050. Again, it's a big challenge. The industrialized world, most of the developed countries have committed to that, but still the rest of the world are saying, well, we see the benefit of that, but you need to also deliver on your promises of support to the less developed countries in meeting this challenge. So there are still negotiations. It's a very complicated process. Over the past few days, I think the global summit of the presidents, the heads of state, they met. They said, well, we lay out the foundations. So that was positive. The real devil is in the details, as they say. And this will pan out in the coming couple of weeks if the delegations from the different countries will be able to reach a binding agreement on these objectives. The hope is, yes, this will happen, but again, we'll have wait and see, because this agreement will then be taken to the summit that will be held in Sharm next year for the countries to review what has been achieved since the 21 summit. So again, we're hopeful, but there's still a long way to go, and countries will have to provide sacrifices in order for these objectives to be met.
A long way to go, but I guess that hosting COP27 in Egypt is going to send different important messages to the whole world.
Of course.
And it's a win-win situation. What do you think?
Well, definitely. It's a win-win. I think a lot of countries and cities in the world would have really hoped to host such an event. So I think definitely it's a victory for a country like Egypt to host such an event, and also to be able to showcase to the world that it's not only committed to its own development, but also to the well-being of the region and the rest of the world.
I thank you so much, Professor Dr. Mohamed Fahmy, Professor of Political Science at AUC, for joining us on Wednesday debate and reading with us this important headline. Always adding value, Dr. Fahmy. Thank you.
My pleasure.
And I thank you, dear viewers, for joining us. That was Wednesday debate with Taghreed Hussein. Tomorrow, another team. Until then.